Good morning, everyone, to our Community Tech Talk number 12. It's the Transforming Vulnerability Response. I am Jen Bargel. I am a solution consultant on the Air Force team. And I'd like to also introduce my partner in crime today, Matt Fisher. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Just took me a second to find the mute button. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I'm a security and risk architect for our DoD and IC teams.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Just a couple of things for notice for you all. You are all on mute. That is by design. You will have a Q&A option down at the bottom of your screen where you can ask questions, or you can also utilize the chat feature. And one of the things that we wanted to notice as well is that we have a safe harbor notice for forward-looking statements. This is just our legal statement that we're putting in here to cover ourselves for anything moving in the future. Today's agenda is going to include a platform overview that I'm going to give. And then Matt is really going to be going over the vulnerability response and the integration with a demo. And then we're going to leave about 10 minutes at the end, hopefully with some Q&A, but please feel free to utilize that throughout the demonstration. We'll throw in questions to Matt throughout. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and get started. So for those of you who have not been introduced to ServiceNow before, we're really a platform of platforms for digital workflows. We're integrating systems together for the cradle to grave concept of bringing information and siloed compartments together to create a seamless experience for your employees and customers to unlock that productivity. And all of that is done through our Now platform. And through that platform, we're able to utilize one platform, one data model, one architecture. And what that really means is that there's one language that's cohesively combining all of the information in a single pane of glass to enable you to work more efficiently and productively through the environment. And so that enterprise concept of utilizing a solidified CMDB in order to get work done. And so you're able to put that together with a knowledge base, so having a single point where airmen and employees are able to get access themselves to solve tier 0 or tier 1 efforts, and to be able to escalate those efforts in the background where they don't realize all of the touch points that are going on, but are able to get that work completed in a more effective manner. And then there's machine learning, AI, developer tools, and web and mobile conversational ability. And that's just a way to say that we're utilizing AI operations and natural language learning to enhance what you already have available to you on our platform, to encourage more development and business process improvement. And we're going to be going through several different workflow options in this slide, but Matt's really going to be talking about IT workflows, and that's where ServiceNow cut its teeth. So the IT help desk, your operations, your business, and security. And all of that ties in IT. Having that solid infrastructure to work is going to allow work to be done more effectively. And then there's employee workflows and customer workflows that's really centered around getting business done, whether it's outward facing or inward facing. And then there's the app engine that's a low code, no code, or pro code environment, as well as having our store that is available for ServiceNow that other companies and DoD entities that we've worked with that have developed custom applications to fit their needs. These are out there on the store that are reviewed by ServiceNow and put out there for you to essentially reutilize. So instead of recreating the wheel, you're able to move that forward more effectively. And through great experiences, we're bringing that home experience for your airmen into your work life. And so that includes the mobile, the web, and conversational abilities. Being able to bring those Amazons and series the Alexas and Siri experience into your work life is going to make it an easier transition, especially with the new age of airmen coming up and what they're accustomed to. And so with that, we're able to integrate systems of record. So things like Tanium and Splunk and Oracle, we're able to integrate with each of these legacy systems, but we're also able to replace some systems that you have available as well. And that's where we're really going to hone in today on the IT workflows and being able to use security operations for that vulnerability response. So being able to tie in each of these features that are, again, on a single pane of glass to be able to allow your work to flow way better. And so now I'm going to kick this off to Matt. And so Matt, it is your turn to take over and show us what you've got.
Hey, awesome. Thank you, Jen. That was a great job. Hey, good morning, everyone. First, I'd like to start by saying, truly, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend it with us. My name is Matt. I'm a security and risk solution consultant. I work in the DoD and IC here at ServiceNow. Right now, there's a lot of ServiceNow people, I'm sure, laughing at the photo that was placed of me in the front slide. That's not me anymore. That's a pretty old photo. I actually started doing security back in the 90s. I'm kind of a graybeard, metaphorically and very literally these days. And I came over to ServiceNow about 2.5 years ago to work very specifically with this portfolio of products. I'd been doing some very deep cyber work for a long time. And what I really appreciate about ServiceNow is how we're helping solve the scalability, the business problems of security. How do we actually make this stuff work at a scale that allows us to defend and fortify our systems faster? So I always like to start off with kind of a thinking point and a photo. This is a photo I selected when I was presenting to a CISO of a service branch. And even though it's only one-way audio right now, you can't really kind of shout out answers, but take a look at this and try and imagine what this might be, what it looks like. I'll give you a second. I'll give you a hint. It's 3D cement printed barracks. And I love this because it shows that in the physical world now, we're taking advantage of automation. We're taking advantage of new evolving technologies to build and fortify faster and faster. This is actually a Marine Corps project, and they're printing cement fortified barracks in under 48 hours. So the next question, of course, is think about how long it takes you to track down vulnerabilities in your environment. How long does it take to fortify your environment? Probably a little bit longer than 48 hours. And of course, that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about improving your vulnerability response. Now, vulnerability response is just one of our security products. I'm not going to go deep into these other ones, but this is part of our security orchestration, automation, and response capabilities on the ServiceNow platform. Leveraging all the benefits of the ServiceNow platform that Jen just talked about. And as I go through and show you the product step by step, I'll show you all the cool ways we leverage that platform. We do the same thing for security incident response. And then we have an entire set of risk and compliance capabilities. And because these are built on the platform, they all work together. Today, we're going to focus on just the vulnerability response aspects. This is what I call the vulnerability response lifecycle. And this is notional. I built this. This didn't come from SANS or NIST or Cybercom or NSA. This is actually based on just dozens of customer conversations where they're expressing how things work or don't work in their environment, what their challenges are, what the processes look like. And the more I have these conversations, the more similar they all start to sound. There's a huge amount of manual work involved, whether it's just researching the actual impacted assets, right? Does this asset even have the software that's stated in the vulnerability? Is this a real vulnerability, or could this be a false positive that came out of the scanner, right? And then prioritizing the work. How are we going to go through and score these? Some organizations score in very rudimentary manners. Other organizations score in very sophisticated manners. But rarely is that scoring very automated because they don't have access to all the information they would like to score these things. I presume everyone here works in security. And if you work in security, you know it's a cat and mouse game, that the Op4 is extremely sophisticated. There's a lot more of them than there are of you. And so we're always thinking about how we can evolve things. And we're always thinking like, hey, we should be able to score on different types of attributes and not just what the scanner provided. But then again, you have to actually figure out who fixes that vulnerability, right? And then the big thing I hear is after we go through all this manual work, and this can be days or weeks, right? We go through all that manual work, we finally kind of shake everything out, we get our spreadsheets together, we get these vulnerabilities off to the operations teams. But since it's a different team, we don't really know where they are in the remediation cycle. We have to wait. We can play the email game and the phone call game and kind of pester them. And I've worked with organizations that have full-time employees who do nothing but try to follow up with the operations teams. Or we can wait for the scanner to sweep around again, right? Kind of like blips on the radar. But it could be 2 to 4 weeks or longer before that scan comes around again. In the meantime, you could have completely missed your deadline for those vulnerabilities. So getting that visibility into the other side of the house becomes a pretty key management issue for folks as well. But all in all, we hear that there's just a huge amount of manual work involved in this. I once worked with an organization who had someone who was doing security work in a sense, but because of the manual nature of their environment, the lack of automation they had behind their vulnerabilities, this individual's full-time job ended up becoming copying and pasting from their scanner into email. Definitely not the way you want to work. There's big penalties for these lack of automation, right? Manual processes are inefficient, but when you're talking about manual processes around cybersecurity, it's not just, you know, employee hours spent or costs associated with it. Inefficiencies in cybersecurity increase risk. And these inefficiencies can really add up. It's kind of like an endurance sport where that economy of motion becomes very important over many miles. You may not think about it if you're doing a short jog, but when you start getting into the long game, little details really add up. In surveys conducted over the last couple of years, respondents told us that 61% of them thought their manual processes put them at a disadvantage, meaning they cannot compete against the enemy. There's an average of 12 days lost just to coordination. This is not the time it takes to do the work. This is not the time for actual patching and planning, but literally just coordinating communications and activities back and forth. And the average time to patch was 12 weeks. It's unacceptable when you're trying to defend military systems. So clearly doing scans are not just enough. There needs to be kind of a change in how you approach vulnerability response as a whole. Getting out of spreadsheets, getting out of SharePoint, and getting into real automation. And so I'm going to show you how we leverage this incredible ServiceNow platform to help you do that. I'm going to talk about the platform for a second. I see it in different ways. Everybody looks at our platform and sees it in different ways. I view this platform as, first and foremost, a data lake. We have all this incredible data from all over the enterprise coming together. It's all in the same database. Now, of course, there's role-based access controls, there's attribute-based access controls, there's lots of divisions across the data. It doesn't mean everyone gets access to everything. But what it does mean is it's very easy to build workflows that cross functional lines of business. So if you're a vulnerability team, you may not be the operations team, but you're certainly very reliant on them. And they may even have some policy-based accountability back to you. Working across these teams is extremely easy in ServiceNow. Another aspect of ServiceNow I see is this rapid application development environment, where we built all these Lego blocks of automation, right? A whole framework for building reports, a framework for notifications, a framework for workflows and dashboards and orchestrations. And then we took these building blocks and we built our applications out of it. We built vulnerability response out of it. So what this means is you not only get out of the box capability, but you get this incredible ability to really mold everything to your environment as need be. I call it building real mission capability.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you.
My watch was having trouble hearing me, apparently. I apologize. I don't know if anyone heard that. So here's how we built vulnerability response. This is just kind of a map recon so that you can understand the different moving pieces before I switch over into the browser and show you the actual product. Before I go in, I'd like to pause. Jen, have there been any questions so far?
So there is a question, and so they're asking, is it possible to use the vulnerability scanners with ACAS?
Yes, absolutely. So the, and in fact, we have this is ACAS logo right up here. So the very first step to this is we have out-of-the-box integrations to ACAS, which is really Tenable Security Center. If you aren't using Tenable, we also have out-of-the-box integrations with Qualys, Rapid7, and some others, as well as Tenable.io. Within the DoD, and in fact, within the majority of the federal government, I would say, Tenable Security Center is what's being used. Within the DoD, you may know this as ACAS, which is DISA's program name for it. This is an out-of-the-box integration. It's actually currently built and supported by Tenable themselves, right here in Columbia, Maryland. So we have an integration with ACAS. And what we do is we pull the vulnerabilities in. And I'll show you how to configure that. We can talk about the details of configuring that integration if you want. It's really quite simple. But we pull those vulnerabilities in on a regular basis. Then we do things like pull in the National Vulnerability Database. And then we can pull in threat intelligence as well. It can be commercial threat intelligence, such as Recorded Future, or it can be open source stuff like Shodan. If you're not familiar with Shodan, it's a neat little feed. It just tells you if a vulnerability has a known script written for OpenDB or Metasploit, right? i.e., is there literally a script kiddie script POC out there floating around? Good threat intel that can tell you things like, is this exploitable? How exploitable is this? Then we take all of that and we combine it together to form a vulnerable item record. Then we start doing some really cool stuff. The first thing we do is we take the identifying information we get from ACAS, whether it's an IP or a NetBIOS name, a DNS name, and we resolve it against the CMDB. We use a series of lookup rules. They're very open. They're very configurable. If you've never done hands-on work in ServiceNow, go do it. Jen had some really good resources up there, and we can show those again. We have a lot of online resources to help you get free little developer instances and tutorials. Building and doing things in this platform is a joy because it's so open and configurable. So the lookup rules we use can be completely modified. And in cases we have, reconfigured those based on organizational ConOps. But by resolving that machine into the CMDB, we get a plethora of information about it. The CMDB is essentially an asset database. It's a very large, very mature asset database with tons of incredibly helpful information in it. Now, I'll admit, before I came to ServiceNow, I didn't know what a CMDB was. I wasn't an operations guy. I was doing deep software stuff, right? The more I work with it, the more I realize how fundamental a CMDB is to anything IT related in an organization. In the CMDB, as an example, we can get the operating system of the impacted host, which can help you resolve those vulnerabilities super quickly. But we may also have attributes in there like the physical location. Is it in this data center? Is it in Stafford, Virginia, or is it in Okinawa? Is it at Belvoir, or is it overseas? We might be able to get the program risk, who it's assigned to. And very importantly, we can get business service out of it, business service information. Our CMDB does not just manage the information about individual assets, but also manages their technical relationships. Like this speaks to that, this relies on that, and it also manages the service information, meaning the programs. This asset rolls up to this service or this program, which rolls up to this program. So we can leverage all of that information we get from the CMDB, all the information we get from Tenable itself, from threat intel, from the NVDB, information like CVSS scoring, And we can use all of that in this chain of automation. We can use that to automate the risk scoring, again, based on any of these attributes. We can automatically assign remediation timeframes that say, hey, this is expected to be remediated within 7 days. We can automatically assign the vulnerabilities to the correct teams. And then later in the product, I'll show you how you can use any of these attributes to group like vulnerabilities together so that you can work them in mass and do things like create those change requests on an entire collection of vulnerabilities at once instead of working them one by one. And then of course, what would it be if you didn't have plenty of metrics behind it? I'll tell you a beautiful thing about undergoing digital transformation. When you work in the physical world, in the kinetic world, and you're making phone calls and hitting Slack and hitting email, it's very hard to kind of instrument what the actual time on target is for some of these activities. When you start bringing these manual activities of any sort, whether it's vulnerability related or anything else, HR stuff, when you start bringing these activities into a digital process, it's all self-instrumented. So getting great metrics becomes super easy. Visualizing those metrics in dashboards and reports becomes super easy. So I'll pause there for questions, and then I'll kill the PowerPoint and flip over to product and show you the real thing.
So one of the questions that came through was if this is only cloud-based or is this available on-prem?
So this is absolutely available cloud. It's available in public commercial clouds. It's available in our GCC, our government compliant clouds, and it is also available in use on-prem. I will tell you that ServiceNow is in use in every environment and every classification domain you can think of. So even if you're working on JWICs and SCI programs, ServiceNow absolutely is available to you. Thanks, Jen. And as a reminder, I don't see the chats. I don't see the little hands up when I'm presenting. So I do appreciate you kind of rallying those up for me. So great. Let me stop sharing. I'll flip over to my browser. 1 second. Ta-da. Don't worry, I will make this big. Awesome. So is the sharing working out okay? Can everyone see my screen?
Yes. Yep, I can see your screen.
Thank you. I just want to start off showing a couple of quick dashboards. Nothing big, but I mentioned how things get automatically instrumented when you transform those processes, and you have all of this really useful data together in one platform. And so what this means, it's very easy for us to build a variety of dashboards. This is a cyber risk dashboard, which is showing different sorts of metrics, vulnerabilities with exploits, et cetera. And here's a vulnerability remediation dashboard. This is also an example of one of the ways you can get work assignments. You can see that here are vulnerabilities assigned to my team or stuff assigned to me individually. But the real secret to these dashboards is while we do provide you with a lot of dashboards out of the box, they're super, super duper malleable. I can hit this plus button over here, and I can now add any report that exists in the system. I can build new reports. I can add content blocks, which are basically like web dev elements, HTML elements, things like that, to build a highly formatted dashboard. And that's kind of a common request, right? Organizations say, hey, we've been kind of doing this, and then once a week we build a PowerPoint and we present it to the kernel, and the kernel definitely wants a dashboard, but the kernel still wants it to look like that PowerPoint. So you can go and you can modify these dashboards and really make them yours. And what I'm showing here is just a library of reports that are available to me in my demo instance. But the really cool part is that it is super easy to build these reports yourself. It works a lot like building a chart in Excel. You pick the table you want to report on, you give it a name, and then we give you a library of visualizations. And you can see that there are visualizations. There's simple bar charts and pie charts, but there's also kind of time series charts where you're viewing viewing data over time. There's these multi-dimensional reports, which I guess teleport you to another time and space. The heat map, of course, is a very popular one. And then we have some others down here. A really popular one is the map. If you work in a geographically distributed enterprise, it can be really helpful just to have that map up on the SOC screen that says, hey, these are where vulnerabilities are existing. And of course, calendars are super useful for tracking any sort of deferrals and exceptions you issue. And I'll even show you how you can do that within the vulnerability response application. Now, there's a couple of different ways of creating vulnerabilities. I mentioned that we pull in the results from ACAS, and that's one of the ways. But you can also manually search your software library. If you're using the software asset management module within ServiceNow, that's going out and it's taking an inventory of the software on your network. Now, it may not be as super precise as you might like, but we'd still give you the ability to search it. So here I'm searching for Microsoft Windows. Maybe I just need to do a quick tally and figure out how many instances of Windows occur. And if I click through here, I can see the discovery model, and I can see all 47 different hosts that have Windows on it. And then I can create a vulnerable item from this directly. So if we get an alert that says, hey, Windows Server 2016 DC 10, 16.384 is vulnerable, go out and find all instances of it on your network and eradicate it, right? Then this is a very quick, easy way for me to say, hey, we have at least 14 known instances of this on our network, and open a ticket from there. Now, of course, that's no replacement for scanning. Scanning is always going to be your ground truth, but that's one of the capabilities there. Now, when you create vulnerable items, they go here. We create a case, a ticket, a record called vulnerable items. This is a list view in ServiceNow. If you've never worked in a list view, it gives you a lot of capabilities. You can do things like sort and group, you can search, you can filter things out and filter things in. And you can use this funnel here to access lots of different fields, basically database fields underneath. And you can filter this list exactly as you like. I've done that over here. I built a filter to only look at vulnerabilities coming from Tenable Security Center. We do have Security Center in our lab. That doesn't make us experts in it. I'm definitely not an expert in Tenable Security Center or ACAS, but I thought it'd be nice to be able to show you what a real ACAS vulnerability will look like within ServiceNow. And so this is only showing me vulnerable items that came from Tenable Security Center, from this source right here. You can save these filter sets, you can bookmark them as I have over here, and really make these views your own. Let me click through and take a look at this vulnerable item. All right, so there's a couple of things going on. First and foremost, we're telling you right away that this vulnerability is way overdue, right? We're giving you that warning banner. And that's because we have the ability to automatically create remediation targets for these vulnerabilities. And we track those targets and we let you know when they're overdue. That also means it's extremely easy for you to build reports and dashboard widgets and notifications and things like that. So it's very easy to come in every day and see like, hey, which vulnerabilities are gonna expire this week, right? It's very easy to build in automatic nags that go out and hit operations and say like, hey, you only have 4 days left to fix these, right? And that's all automated. We have a risk score here. And again, that risk score can be based on any attribute of that vulnerable item. And I want to explain a little of the semantics here. We use this term vulnerable item. To us, in our vernacular, a vulnerability means literally a CVE. The fact that this new Windows vulnerability exists somewhere in the world, right? When you scan or when you create manual cases and you say that this vulnerability exists on this asset, we then call that a vulnerable item. So this vulnerable item record is the combination of the vulnerability against this asset. And so you can see that we've resolved it to this specific asset in the CMDB. This gives the analyst one-click visibility to this asset's real CMDB record. This is the preview. This is kind of the short form. And if I click here, I get the full form. Now, this is super helpful to me as a security person who never really worked with a CMDB before. This blows my mind because the amount of information that you can get out of the CMDB is stunning, right? And the important thing to realize is this is live, real, central ground truth. This is the same CMDB that your operations team's working off, that your ITSM team is working off. There's grooming and care and feeding standards around it. So everyone's working off ground truth. This isn't like a spreadsheet you got from a buddy on a program team that's a month old. It's not an SSP from like a year ago. It's real. This button right here opens a dependency view. These are magic. This is where we take that knowledge from the CMDB. We take that knowledge of what machines speak to, their technical relationships, but also their service relationships. So here I can see that this impacted machine is a Linux server. And it's talking to a couple of switches and it's in front of a bunch of databases. So as a security person right there, that kind of sets the spidey senses tingling, right? But I can also see that it rolls up to this service, which rolls up to this service. Now, the team that builds these demos for us, they like to use stores as an example. This is actually kind of the target breach, right? But you can think of these as like an analysis stack that then serves up to an intelligence platform, or a subservice that rolls up to a weapons system, or just a business service. So you get really valuable technical and business context instantly. These various icons are telling me things like there's security incidents opened against this. There's IT alerts opened against this. Now, from a security perspective, I think that's helpful, right? Well, if you get a security incident that says, hey, we have a lot of outbound chatter on this one machine, then you see it has an IT alert, and the IT alerts are saying like, yeah, the hard drives are thrashing, right? They're just spinning nonstop. And then you find it has certain vulnerabilities on it. Those are all really good clues to tell you something like, hey, there's a good chance this machine got popped and someone's like burning up ISOs and egressing ISOs. Getting that kind of situational awareness, right, in one easy click to me is really key. And of course, this particular map, this visualization is very configurable. I can see all that information about risks and IT alerts for the entire chain, and I can control how it's visualized, the depth and the breadth and things like that. So going back to our vulnerable items ticket, I'm going to keep working down. I can see that this has been automatically assigned to a team to work on. And again, this is based on any of these attributes we can go through and select. We have the remediation target. This field right here is not a field that's displayed by default. You can go in here and do configure form layout, and you can add and remove fields. You can create your own fields. I added this in just to show you that we are bringing all the data in from ACAS, even though we may not necessarily display it by default. If your technical ConOps relies on like a really, a fine detail that comes in, that data comes in over the integration and it can be leveraged in this automation. We also clearly understand that vulnerabilities are not necessarily killed the first time around. So we have a couple of different date fields here. It's not just when the vulnerability was found, it's when it was first found, when it was last found, how many times it's been found, right? Because unfortunately, sometimes it takes more than one scan, more than one try to resolve these things. And then down here, we have information coming in from Tenable and some CVSS information coming in from the National Vulnerability Database. Here we have some of that threat intelligence coming in from Recorded Future. All in a single case. So your vulnerability analysts don't have to move around between a million different systems. And of course, because it is ServiceNow, it's very easy for us to use things like the flow designer and our platform capabilities to reach out and bring even more data in here. Perhaps you have internal systems, your DoD, you might have some very neat new security technology that's not widely known that you'd like to integrate in. That's all feasible. So the next thing I'd like to show you is how we take this capability and then we scale it out via vulnerability groups. But before I show you that, I'd like to pause here for any questions.
Perfect, Matt, because there are a couple of questions. So one is specific to the maps because they use Google Maps on-prem, but they don't have access to the API via internet. Is there an alternate method to populate maps?
So off the top of my head, I don't know. That's not something I've worked on before, and that would actually fall outside of my role in security and risk. So unfortunately, I don't know the answer to that. I can, however, go back to our broader team of solution architects and figure out the answer. It is certainly used on-prem in lots of cases, and our solution architects have built some really creative, high-value solutions for customers using lots of different technologies. So
Awesome.
Jen,
And
if you
there's
don't
another
mind,
question. Sorry.
yeah, well, if you don't mind, if we could write down the name of the individual that asked that specific question, or maybe ping him in direct IM, get an email so we can follow up with them.
Absolutely, already on it.
Excellent, thank you.
And then another question from Tina is, if a CMDB doesn't already exist, ServiceNow creates one, question mark? If so, how does it deconflict data between the various sources?
What a fantastic question. So first of all, you do not need a CMDB to use the vulnerability response product. Some organizations don't have a CMDB. Some organizations are rolling it out now, but the security team's going, hey, we need automation now. We can't wait on the larger enterprise. We need to secure things, whether we have that CMDB or not. So you don't need the CMDB, right? Now that CMDB is going to give us things like that internal ground truth. And that CMDB gives us things like this dependency view, but it's not necessary. It's a value add, if you will. It's a significant value add, but it's not necessary to vulnerability response or running the product. Now, when Tenable finds assets, and it will find assets, right? Because, here's Jen and all the other folks on here who haven't necessarily worked in security a lot. The first thing you learn to do when you work in security is think like the bad guy, right? You hit them where they ain't. You don't go out and you scan the major systems that all the eyes are on. When I was doing penetration tests and red teaming stuff, I looked for the systems that were seemingly less visible, seemingly unimportant. The stuff that was in a closet somewhere maybe had some spider webs on it, but was still connected up to the same network. And that's the stuff you go out. The soft targets are just as key as the hard targets. So I expect every vulnerability team out there to be doing their best to find new assets and scan them, which is good stuff. Now, when that happens, Tenable will throw them into a separate list of tables. It might take me a minute to scroll through. I have like every Tenable module, every security module in here. But we basically throw it into a separate table and we say, hey, we found assets, right? ACAS found assets that don't exist in the CMDB, and we let you classify them. Classify means you go through and you say, you're basically placing it in the correct place in the CMDB schema. So you say, oh, this is a Windows Server 12, and that means it in the CMDB schema, it goes under CIs, then it goes under servers, then it goes under Windows, then it goes under Windows 12. Now, the form that we do that in lets you go directly to a classification. And it would be expected that you'd have some processes wrapped around that, right? There should be kind of an acceptance process for entering things in the CMDB. You want to be able to know like who the system owner is. Potentially, depending on how your CMDB is structured, you may want to tag it with the ISO or with the program or the classification domain. So we would expect you to kind of go into that form a little bit and add some of that process in there that works for your organization. But that ability to find new assets and introduce them into the CMDB is part of this integration. Hopefully that was helpful.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Go ahead and move on. We don't have any other follow-up questions at this point.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So hopefully that talk about vulnerable items and the automation we present there is useful. Now, I dig it. I think it's super useful and super valuable. It's not magic. This is plain sense stuff, right? but every customer I talk to struggles with it. I mean, my full-time job is talking to customers about their security challenges, right? I've literally never had a customer tell me, nah, our vulnerability is good, right? It's just not the state of affairs. But those vulnerable items are dealing with things one at a time. So how can we step up the game and scale even more? How can we increase the throughput of our vulnerability team 2, 3, 4, 5 times X? You start grouping things together. You deal with similar vulnerabilities in like ways, right? Because vulnerabilities tend to come in waves and they tend to affect lots of things at once, especially the Windows stuff, because there's just so much Windows out there. So this is the list of vulnerability groups. And again, what I've done is I've sorted this, I've filtered it, I've made this list my own, and then I saved that filter set to my favorites here so I could easily recall it. So here's a couple of groups I built myself. They're really simple groups, but they illustrate the potential of what you can do. So let's say I'm responsible for multiple data centers. We have one in San Diego. Maybe we have one down in Honolulu. We have one in San Antonio. And I know that these data centers all have different operations teams behind them. And that on these operation teams, they then further subdivide their work. They have Windows specialists, they have Unix folks, they have Cisco folks, Juniper folks. And to speed things up, I want to get these vulnerabilities into the most complete hands I can, right? The furthest to that chain, I want to get it as close to that end operations person as I can. So here what I'm doing is I'm building a group based on some simple conditions. Now, if you've never worked in ServiceNow before, you're going to see this GUI element quite a bit. This is a common GUI controlled through ServiceNow. It's called a condition builder. And it lets you walk through the data through the schema and get to any attribute. So you can get many degrees of separation away from the original case. And then you can use any of these attributes and set a condition on it. You can use Boolean logic, you can do string comparisons, and you can build as many of these as you wish. You can make the conditions required, you can make them optional. What you're really doing here is building a very complex set of SQL queries without even having to understand what SQL is. So what I did is I walked through the configuration item. I am leveraging the CMDB. And I walked to its location. And I said the location is San Diego. I want you to include it in this rule if the class of that configuration item, remember I talked about how you can classify it, if that class is Windows Server. And then just now, just as a demo, I walked through the assignment contacts account banner, and I said if it also includes the word bacon, include it in this list. But that was just a demo. I'm going to remove that. I'll remove these. And now we're back to the original group I built. So I'm building a set of conditions. And here I can see that when this ran, it matched 233 different vulnerable items. So there's 233 vulnerabilities on our network that match these conditions. Again, I've automatically scored it, and I've automatically assigned it to the San Diego Windows Ops team. And in this case, I went a step further and just gave them all to Guillermo because he still owes me money. Although the most appropriate thing really would probably be to just assign it to that ops team and let them figure out who the lucky winner on their side is going to be. From here, I can action these all in one fell swoop. I can create security incidents. Now I thought about this one for a second. Why would you create a security incident for a vulnerability? Well, what if it's a particularly egregious vulnerability, right? What if it allows like remote shellcode execution, right? RCE, and it's been sitting on this machine for like a year. In that case, me as a security person, I'd want some sort of forensic response. I'd want that disk DD'd. I'd want traffic logs reviewed. I'd want to go hit the PCAP archives, and figure out if anyone actually used that vulnerability or not. Of course, you can create workflows. And we have a sample workflow that we have built in called a vulnerability crisis workflow. This is like a shell shock or heartbleed scenario. There's no time to waste. We can't wait on kind of the normal approval cycles and humans logging in. We're going to shove things through the process faster. But of course, the most common disposition you would probably take is to create a change request. And you can do that right from here. And the really cool thing about this is when you create the change request, it creates a single change request that references back to this vulnerability group with those 233 vulnerabilities in it. So instead of creating 233 different change requests or different tickets for your service managers and your operations folks, right? That really upsets them. Folks get really upset when you like completely flood their work queue. We create a single change request, we reference back to all of those vulnerabilities, and we let them work through the process. The other really cool aspect of that is since this change management process, right, getting it authorized, scheduling it, working through the testing cycles, and then the whole operations side of things of sending it to a patching server or a software management server. Since all that occurs within ServiceNow, you as the vulnerability team can get visibility to that. So go back to some of our dashboards, and we can see things like vulnerable items actually closed by remediation targets. I can go in and I can add reports from ITOM. I can build widgets that say things like, hey, this operations team over here has 200 vulnerabilities that are within 2 days of their due date. And you get that visibility that you may not have right now. Right? If you're kind of working in traditional kinetic ways and you're emailing spreadsheets and you're making phone calls and you're catching people in the chow line, you may not really have that visibility of where we actually stand on remediation, but ServiceNow can bring that to you as well. So I'd like to pause here for any questions.
So right now there's no further questions. If you want to go ahead and press with the demo, I know we have 10 minutes left.
Yeah, awesome. So that was really everything I was planning to show today. We can do deeper dives if you really want to narrow in on a specific area. We can do a separate one-off demo for you in a deeper dive. Let me go ahead and show you one other aspect of the ServiceNow vulnerability response module. It's called the vulnerability solutions. We're bringing in data from Microsoft that relates vulnerabilities to hot fixes and patches and service packs and the sort. And we're creating the order of precedence for you so that you can understand easier which particular solution fixes which vulnerabilities and which solution fixes the most vulnerabilities. So for instance, maybe we're going to go apply this fix that addresses this one CVE. Well, the vulnerability solution capabilities in ServiceNow may tell you that that was actually superseded by a different solution that fixes more items at once. Right? So you can use this on the remediation side of things to help plan your remediation strategy. Okay, we have 2 million vulnerabilities. How do I knock out the most vulnerabilities the fastest? And this is integrated in with vulnerability response and part of the vulnerability response.
Okay, fantastic. Lee is asking a question. Does SecOps ingest STIGs?
So out of the box, the security operations side does not ingest STIGs. That is something that could potentially work with our configuration compliance module. Let me go back to the PowerPoint real quick and see if I can bring that slide up. So it's not part of the vulnerability response, but we have another module that's not listed here called configuration compliance, which is oriented towards this exact kind of scenario. You're out there, you're doing scans, you're doing SCAP scans, you're finding areas where this reg key wasn't right, this system setting wasn't right, it violates our hardening policy or our configuration policy, which in your case would be STIGs. And it brings those results into the ServiceNow platform so that you can drive automation with them. You can drive the remediation taskings. You can leverage them and like your overall risk management, et cetera. Out of the box, however, it doesn't import STIGs. We do have partners and likely customers who've built some of those integrations themselves. So as we get some more of these releases from partners, I'm expecting some stuff to end up on the ServiceNow store relatively soon. In fact, those little add-ons might be able to solve that for you.
Awesome, thanks. And then if anyone else has any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the Q&A or the chat so that we can address them here.
Thank you. In the meantime, let me close out with a couple of thoughts. We use our own vulnerability response products. We drink our own champagne with great results, but we also go out and we study customers who use it. Forrester has gone out and studied how our customers have used vulnerability response, how they've used security incident response, how they've used our risk and policy compliance products. And the return on investment on these things is real. And this is one of the things I love about vulnerability response as well. It's a really simple workflow. When you start looking at SOC automation, you have lots of different technologies, lots of different playbooks and processes, right? It gets messier. Everyone in the DoD seems to practice vulnerability pretty much the same way. It's all ACAS. Maybe there's a little bit of Rapid7 or Qualys, some one-off. But for the most part, it's all ACAS and a very homogeneous process behind it. And the benefits to automating your vulnerability response are huge, right? In one case, up to 60% faster prioritization, increasing the response time, and that all leads to large financial benefits, of course. But I would like to leave you with this. When it comes down to actually integrating the configuration with ACAS, there's a couple of different connectors you need. Plugins, I apologize. There's a couple of different plugins you need, the first of which is the connector. This is the API foundational layer that Tenable built for going back and speaking to Tenable Security Center. Then you need Tenable for assets. This is so that they can do some of their CMDB syncing and they can suggest new assets. And, hey, we discovered this asset that doesn't exist. Do you want to add it in? And then finally, Tenable for vulnerability response. These are all available on the ServiceNow store. If you're a cloud customer, you can go into the store and add them yourself. If you're working on premise or working in like a private cloud, then our teams can deliver these plugins for you. They're totally available on-prem. And Tenable has their own video for configuring these things. It is pretty straightforward. It really consists of going into Security Center, creating a new account for the APIs, generating the API keys, then coming back into the plugin in ServiceNow, plugging the usernames, passwords, et cetera, into there. So that's all I have. I'd like to thank you for your time again. I'm very flattered that so many people would take time out of their day to come listen to me. And you could be having lunch, chilling out somewhere, getting other stuff done. It's much appreciated. Jen, I'll turn it back to you now.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Everyone else, this is going to go ahead. We're going to finish this up later this week on Thursday. We're going to have a GRC and SecOps Tech Talk. You are welcome to join us for that. That's going to be at 11 o'clock Eastern. With that, you guys have a fabulous day. And if you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to the ServiceNow team for either a copy of this recording or the slides that we had today. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.